I'm going to do this week's video kind of back to front and then pretty myopically focused on just the have I been pwned stuff. And in case you're not watching this and you're listening to it instead, I'm sitting on a beach. We'll get back to why I'm sitting on a beach. So sponsors first. Duo Security has got a piece up here about securing remote access. Duo Security is this week's blog sponsor. They've got good material out there for you to go and have a look at, and Duo does operate in a space which is very, very relevant to what a lot of people listening to this live in. So big thanks to Duo Security. Go and check them out. Link at the top of my blog, link in the references at the bottom of the post which accompanies this video. So, have I been pwned? I do actually have other stuff this week which I've done, but I'm actually going to hold it over to next week because I just want to talk about have I been pwned, and in particular Project Svalbard, which has come to its conclusion. And I wrote a blog post about this on Tuesday morning. I'm recording this Friday morning my time, so we're literally like 72 hours into it. And I have no notes on this, by the way, in part because I'm sitting on the beach and I didn't bring my iPad, which I normally have, and in part because I just don't think that this is an update that needs to be scripted. Not that the others are particularly scripted, but I do have bullet points. This one has none of that. The blog post on Tuesday was about how the Project Svalbard project initiative to find a new home for Have I Been Pwned has concluded, and that I won't be selling Have I Been Pwned, and that I'll continue to run it independently. And I want to sort of take this opportunity in this video to talk about some of the reasons why I went down this path, some of the reasons why we are now where we are, and then I particularly want to talk about the feedback I've had. And if you've left me feedback and I haven't responded to you, this is going to be particularly relevant to you, but I want to sort of do that towards the end. So scrolling back to early last year, Have I Been Pwned, it just went nuts in terms of popularity. It, particularly around the Collection 1 credential stuffing list, the 732 billion something unique email addresses, loaded that up. It went crazy, busiest day ever I've had on the site. I think I had about 10 million people on the site on the one day, and just the absolute cacophony of noise that followed that, the number of people asking questions, organisations doing domain searches, media, governments, like everything you could imagine, on top of what was already just a really, really heavy workload. It just went nuts. And as I sort of sat there and thought about it, I got to the point where I was like, look, it can't be sustained in this fashion. Something has to change. It can't just be me here running the whole thing independently day in and day out, hoping for the best. So there were sort of a few different options I considered, and then I felt that the best option at the time was to go through and try and find a new home for Have I Been Pwned, try and find an organisation who would want to purchase a system, and me as well, selling myself. I'll come back to that, that feels weird. So we'd do that, we'd find a new place, and if there was an organisation that fit really well, then fantastic, and if there wasn't, I was going to make the decision on the fact that there wasn't. And I'm really conscious that people put a huge amount of trust in me to run the system. This has been really, really evident based on the feedback that's come from this week's blog post as well. So I wasn't just going to go, all right, well, who's got the most money, for example, or who can turn it into the biggest thing. Like it has to be a good fit. Like you can imagine, and incidentally, I'm not going to name any company names as we go through this. I'm not going to even imply who they'd be. But you could imagine organisations out there who would have a lot of money but would be a really, really bad fit. Like imagine if I was to turn around one day and go, hey, I've sort of sold it for $1 gazillion to this company, and I like sail away on my yacht into the Caribbean or something, and everyone's like, well, that guy really sucks. Like that was never, ever, ever going to be the case. So I was always going to be really picky about it. So what I did back in April, so 11 months ago now, is I went and spoke to KPMG. I think everyone knows who KPMG is. They do a heap of things, including all of my accounting for many years now, and got together with some mergers and acquisitions folks. So this is M&A, you're going to hear this term a little bit. And these are really good guys. So I became quite close to the guys up in Brisbane here who run the M&A practice. Terrific people who really helped me understand what it was that Have I Been Pwned sort of stands for. So how do we pigeonhole, if you want, Have I Been Pwned in terms of what the service is and who it should appeal to? How do we present it in its best light? And then how do we find organisations who are the sorts of companies that I actually want to be with? So we kicked off this process in April, and very quickly we had a list of over 140 different companies that could fit. Now this was a combination of, because of the nature of what KPM do with their M&A stuff, it's a combination of companies which they had on their list. They got a lot of lists because they do this all the time. And also, after I wrote the original Project Svalbard blog post in June, I think it was, there were a bunch of organisations that reached out and said, hey, look, we're, Acme Core. Acme Core is fake. There was no Acme Core. We're Acme Core. We would really love to work with you, and we think that Have I Been Pwned could be a great fit for us. So that contributed to the list. And what we sort of had to do is go, okay, we've got this massive list of possibilities. How do we now cull this down? Like, imagine a funnel, right? Like, how do we cull the funnel down and take out organisations that, let's say, number one might be the sort of company that I don't want to work for. And we got to keep in mind, and I hope this came across in the blog post, this was really pivotal, which is I go with Have I Been Pwned. And one of the things that became very apparent once we started talking to companies is they don't want Have I Been Pwned. Like, Have I Been Pwned is this. They want me running Have I Been Pwned because that's where the value is. I'll come back to that later on. So what are the companies that I would want to work for? Now this is hard because I haven't worked for a company for the last 5 years, and I've been very happy not working for a company. And as I said during the blog post, there was one meeting in particular I had with an organisation, a company that you all know. And in talking to the person who would be my boss, he said something along the lines of, what does your perfect day in the office look like? And by this time I was really super tired. I was very much getting over the whole thing because it had been a really hard slog up until then. And I'm just going, I get up, I get on my jet ski, I come somewhere like this, and I do whatever the fuck I want. Like, that is my perfect day in the office. Now, to be clear, I'm super productive doing that as well. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that I produce. So this wasn't like I just don't want to do anything. It was more that I self-discipline. So that worried me, but there's this constant thing of without me, there's not Have I Been Pwned, because at the moment, there's a massive amount of dependency on the trust that people have in me in order to send data. So imagine if there was no more pipeline. Imagine if there was no more data that came to me. Now, I never go and look for data. People pop up and they go, here's data. And this happens, I'd say on average, 2 or 3 times a day. So imagine, say, 20 new data breaches every single week. And imagine that pipeline didn't exist anymore. That's what happens if there's not trust in me and if I'm not there with the service. Plus, of course, the relationships there, things like the government relationships. Like, a lot of those government relationships are there because I have gone and spent time with these people face to face. We've drunk beer together, and I use that as a little bit of a, like, maybe you don't drink beer, maybe you like wine, maybe you don't like alcohol at all, like whatever, I don't care. The point is that you get into a social setting with people and you build trust. And trust was the word that just kept coming up over and over and over again. It's trust, trust, trust. So I was going to be going with this system. And as we sort of started to look at organisations and say, would you want to work for this particular company? Some of them, just based on reputation alone, it's like, no. no. Not only because it just doesn't seem like a fun place to work, but also, what would it mean for people's trust in me? What would it mean for my reputation? And it's not like I was going out the whole time going, I've got to keep my reputation really good. There's a big part of what I do and the fulfillment I get out of life is based on the fact that people listen to what I say, and they obviously have some respect for what I say, and I didn't want to do anything to jeopardize that. So we culled a bunch there. Then we culled a bunch in terms of what would the public perception be if I sold Have I Been Pwned to this company. Now, these are 2 different things, because there are companies I met with who, honestly, beforehand, I would not have thought about working for, but after I spent some time with them, sometimes by literally going on site with them in various parts of the world as well, where I went, this is actually a pretty neat place. Totally separate to that, I had a meeting with a government agency earlier this week, And I don't want to talk sort of too much about it in case they figure it out as well. Not that I'm going to disclose anything weird, but it's like I had a perception going into it, and after I had the chat with them, I was like, wow, this is super cool. Like, this actually looks like a pretty fun place. So anyway, my perceptions were challenged when I went into some of these organisations. But there's always the public perception, and again, without naming names, you could imagine many, many different companies where if I was to say, Have I Been Pwned is now owned by, again, the fictitious Acme Corp, I would get crucified. And people would be, perhaps very rightly, worried about what would happen to the data. They'd be worried about what would happen to the service. Would they still be able to go to their friends and family and say, go to Have I Been Pwned and see if you've been pwned? You know, would they be able to do that? You know, quite possibly not. And I didn't want to lose that. So the 140 plus started getting culled down. As we started having discussions, initially via email with these companies, some of them were like, look, actually it's not a good fit for us. Maybe strategically it wasn't a good fit. Maybe they had other things on the agenda at the moment which they had to prioritise. So that started to cull the list down, and eventually we got down to a list, check the blog post, I think it was 32, let's just say 30 plus, organisations where we went, there is a better than average chance that one of these organisations might actually be a good fit for Have I Been Pwned. And all of these companies got information memorandums. Now, information memorandums, or IMs, are not very much fun. This is one of the things I learned through this whole process. It is not very much fun creating, I think we got to like near 100 pages, 70 plus pages of everything from this is what the company earns, this is what the company spends. Okay, not too hard, you can pull that out of accounting software, all this sort of thing. Debts, yeah, that's easy, isn't it? Debts. But then you get into all the self-ingratiating stuff that needs to go into an IM to boost confidence in it. Now this can't be fabricated, it's got to be absolutely fair income, strict, truthful, all this sort of thing, because organisations are relying on that, and if you misrepresent anything through this process and later on there's recourse, it could be really, really nasty. But it's the whole time it's sort of boosting your own creds. And I put a screenshot in the blog post about this one slide which is like, here's Troy and here's him getting the Information Security Hall of Fame thing, and here's him in Congress looking very serious and professional, unlike now. And that is a really interesting experience to go through and sell yourself in that way. Look, I haven't created a CV for 20 years, right? So imagine it's like a CV on steroids, because you're not just trying to sell yourself for a wage for some limited period of time. You're literally trying to sell yourself for what would ultimately be a fairly significant amount of money and be stuck with the company for many years. And I'll come back to that later on as well. So the information memorandum had to have all that. It had to have disclosures about anything that could have a material impact on the value of it. Now, material impact is a word that kept coming up over and over and over and over again. And material impact is any factor which could cause the valuation to change or could present a risk or something like that later on. So I gave an example in the blog post. One of the questions I got a lot of is, have I ever had like legal threats, or have I ever been sued or anything like that? Because let's say there was some court case pending and I didn't tell the company, and then later on this organisation wanting to sue me for whatever reason pops up and goes, oh, now you're owned by Acme Corp, who's got a lot of money, like let's go to town on you. So all of that's got to go into there as well. I didn't mention it in the blog post, but there is a process or a construct called a data room, where as you start getting serious at the point you're into this process, every single document of relevance goes into the data room. All the contracts I have, whether they're contracts for services I use or contracts for people that use my services, into the data room. Any sort of architecture diagrams or process documentation, which I learned is one thing that apparently you're meant to have when you run a company, but it's just me. All that into the data room. So these 30 plus organisations are getting this really, really, really extensive information memorandum, as well as getting access to the data room and all the docs in there. And as we go through that process, more start to drop off. And this is good, because this is what you want. You don't want to have this almost like paradox of choice, right? Where there's too many organisations. You've got to whittle it down. And we sort of started getting down to the point where we gave the 30 plus the IM. I went to San Francisco, which of course is just tech-centric, right? And I spent a lot of time in San Francisco with the KPMG guys, either going to individual tech companies' offices, many of which you'd be familiar with, and a bunch of them coming into the KPMG office as well. There were people that flew from around the world literally for this meeting. They would fly in, they'd come into the KPMG office in San Francisco, they'd sit there for an hour, we'd have a chat, and then they'd fly back to the other side of the world, which was, yeah, it's bizarre. It's like, really? Like you came from there just just to see me and just to talk about Have I Been Pwned? Cool, I guess. So that was a really bizarre feeling as well, and we'd just go back to back, meeting from meeting to meeting, you know, sometimes starting at 7 a.m. because of time zones and things as well, and going through until 7 or 8 p.m. at night, and then going through and adding more information into data rooms or answering questions and things that came up. It was just super intense. And in fact, the hero image for the blog post about the end of Project Spellbar was a screen cap of my laptop at 4 something in the morning in San Francisco, and I was alone in this hotel room. I was jet lagged. My bags had gone missing. They did turn up, fortunately, but they went missing for a bit there. I was tired. I was emotional. It was just frankly, I felt like shit. Like, it was a really rough time at the end of a period that had just been so laborious in preparing all this material. And I think one thing on reflection that people really picked up on in the blog post is just how stressful and draining this process was. And it wasn't just this process. Like, other stuff doesn't stop when you go through M&A. I've still got to run the service, business as usual. I've still got to load data breaches. I've still got to pay bills. I've still got to do tax returns. I've got to do quarterly activity statements every quarter. If you're in Australia and you have to do a BAS, you know how much bloody fun that is. It's not much at all. So all of this stuff still had to be done. And I was just stretching myself so thin, but it needed to happen. Like, we needed to see this process through. So September, August, headed to Vegas to do the Black Hat and DEF CON stuff. And that was a lot of fun, because it's like, it almost felt like a little bit of I'm falling off the side of the sandbank that I'm on, the sand dune. It almost felt like a little bit of a celebration at the end of a really rough period. And Vegas, look, Vegas is intense, but Vegas is a lot of fun as well. So Scott Helm and I spent a lot of time hanging out there, wandering around the halls, talking to people, and just hearing a lot of people talk about how much they love Have I Been Pwned as well. And I'm trying to say this without sounding conceited or self-ingratiating, but it's fascinating how many people come up in conferences and they go, look, I love what you do. I love Have I Been Pwned. Man, this is awesome. We use it all the time for all this sort of stuff. Going to have a sticker, going to have a selfie. And it's like, hell yeah, this is really super cool. This is super cool fun. And for me, those encounters are also an opportunity for people to, I guess, have personal contact and see that when they read my blog post, when they see my videos, when they see me at a conference or on the media or something like that, that's the same consistent person every single time. And we come back, I think, to the trust thing and the integrity bit. It's like, I need to make sure that every single time I engage with people, they see the same person, and they never have a moment where they're like, hang on a moment, I saw this guy the other day and he was, I was going to say he was in a suit, that's a very rare thing. You know, he was representing something very different to today. So those events are enormously important to me. And it did give me a really good bit of headspace where I could sort of focus on the social side and the conference side of things. Still non-stop questions and teleconferences and things like that, but it was a bit of a break. So I had the 30 plus, started to whittle those down to the point where there was a whole bunch of organisations who provided NBIOs, so non-binding indicative offers. And what these are is effectively Acme Corp saying, here's an offer we'd like to make. We're not going to be beholden to this offer. We're basing it on the information that you have shared to date, largely the information in the IM, plus any discussions, meetings, things like this. We're going to pay about this much money. We're going to break it down into cash, equity. We're going to pay it over this period of time as well. Now, here's another really important thing, and I made a big point of this in the blog post, is this concept of golden handcuffs. And golden handcuffs are effectively saying, if you want to get the money which we have promised you, you have to stay here and work for us. Now, golden handcuffs may just be you've got to stick around for this long. It also might be performance driven too. It's like you've got to stick around this long and we've got to see ABC happen. And the term is pretty fair, and the golden bit, it's like, yeah, there could be a lot of money at stake, but the handcuffs, it's like you are selling your soul, like you are stuck with us. And that the thing that increasingly worried me once I saw non-binding indicative offers and once I had these discussions is like, you guys seem nice, but what happens in the future if you have a fundamental change in business strategy? What happens if the person who I like goes and someone else comes in and then they're a dick and I don't like them? Well, there's a really easy answer. It's I can stay and be miserable in the place, or I can leave and pay a huge amount of money for the privilege. And I just got really, really uncomfortable with that premise. Now, it's not to say I wouldn't have done it, and we'll get to the point of the fact where I did agree to do it for an organisation. But it is a big, big risk that could later mean compromising on integrity or money or both. And that could be a really, really awkward position. So the MBIOs coming in, that allowed us to cull a bunch as well, because the MBIOs, it's not just about money, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff here about here's what we want to do with the service. This is where we'd like it to go. This is what we'd like you to do. One of the themes that came up across some of them was, we want to commercialise it in certain ways. And look, I'm not against that. There are commercial aspects to the service already. I've been very public about this many times before. But sometimes they'd want to take it in a direction which to me felt too aggressive, or it felt like a misuse of the data, or it felt like if I was to be as transparent about that as I am just now, that might not be something which is well received. So that allowed us to cull a bunch of organisations. The range of offers, I've had a few people say, how much was the offer for? I'm not going to tell anyone how much the offer was for, largely because of confidentiality clauses. I am confidentiality up to the eyeballs with every one of these organisations, and I'm not going to break any of that. All I will say is that there was a massive range, and frankly some of them were a little bit stupid in terms of the ends of the spectrum. Now, stupid on the big end of the spectrum, that's good. Stupid on the small end of the spectrum, that's just insulting. Some of them were ridiculous. So I was like, okay, you're either not taking this seriously, or you're thinking, hey, one of the things that we felt with the theme a few times was that there are certain organisations, which which were basically taking the attitude of, it would be such a privilege for you to come and work for us that we're going to give you a very low offer. It's like, if you're looking at it that way and not the other way around, this is not the right place for me. It's just simply not going to happen. So that culled a bunch of the organisations at the MBIO stage. I would love one day, I wonder if there's like a statute of limitations or something, I probably should ask KPMG about this, but I would love one day to be able to tell some of the stories about some of the particular companies that were just outrageous, absolutely outrageous. They're the sorts of things I probably did actually speak to close friends over beers about this in the past. But anyway, I can't talk about that here, confidentiality. All right, so we're culling them down. So we end up getting down to a manageable number of non-binding indicative offers. Now, what this means is that we've now got to sort of start to say, okay, well, who's genuinely serious about this? And we literally just ranked the organisations. So which are the ones that are the best fit? And again, because of the confidentiality side of things, and I hate to sort of keep pulling this out because obviously I like transparency, I also like not getting sued. And I actually like not getting sued much more than transparency. So the transparency bit is I just can't talk about a lot of the detail there. But we end up getting down to the wire with one organisation who met all the criteria. And this was an organisation who asked for exclusivity. So they said, look, we think we're a really good fit. We would like you to cease negotiations with other parties and give us a window of opportunity to do some really detailed due diligence. And during that due diligence phase, we're either going to deliver on what we've promised and we'll all do a deal and we'll move forward in the next phase, or we'll pull the pin and then you can go and talk to another party. So apparently this is the way M&A works, and I can understand it because as I was about to learn, due diligence can be massively laborious and expensive on both sides, my side and the purchasing party as well. So we enter this phase of due diligence. Now this is September, and again, confidentiality, I can't give too much away in terms of dates. It went for a very long time. It was very extensive across every single aspect you could possibly imagine of any sort of acquisition of a service, let alone a service which is only there in the first place because people commit a whole bunch of illegal activities. Now we did get over all of that, so we satisfied all the criteria that we need to with that. And we got very, very close to the point where contracts would be signed, deals would be done. I thought I'd be talking about this last year, talking about who the new organisation is and the fact that I was going to be very, very happy working with this company. And long story short, we got through until very, very recently, and we were advised that there'd been a fundamental change in the business procedures of this organisation. And again, this is the bit where I've just got to be a little bit vague. The change was absolutely nothing to do with have I been pwned. It was also absolutely the right thing for them to do. And I totally respect their decision to do that. And to be honest, it came at a time where the process had been so long and so intense and so laborious. When the news came, I was like, whew, so this means it's over. You know, it's like we're done. And I think I was just numb to the whole thing. I was numb insofar as it had been going for so long and it was so laborious. And it all fell on my shoulders. I sort of said in the blog post, every time I got asked about anything financial, I had to answer that question. Anything about the way the system runs, I had to answer that question. Anything about, like, just anything that you can possibly imagine, unless KPMG could play defense, because I'd already asked or answered the question before for someone else, and then they could relay that answer, I had to do it. At the same time as I'm like trying to process data and like literally edit freaking logos to go on data breaches. And I got to that point where it's like, so this whole piece of work around M&A goes away and I can just focus on the other things. And that honestly felt like a relief. So when people have popped up and said, look, I'm sorry, the deal didn't happen in the end, it's like, I appreciate that the sentiment. From my perspective, I absolutely ran this down to the wire. I gave it my best shot. We got to the end of it, suddenly got a whole bunch of time back, and now I'm sitting on a beach. So yes, I wanted to sort of see a sale out of it, but I always wanted to see a sale to the right party. It had to be an organisation I wanted to work for. It had to be one that wanted to do the right thing with the product. And it had to be the one that also saw the right value and the right future in where it was going to go. Yeah, this sort of premise of we're going to pop up and offer you some embarrassing amount of money because you'll have the privilege of being with us, that was just never going to work. So that's where we kind of got to, and it then of course leaves the question of, all right, does this not sort of put you back where you were in January? There's still a huge amount of work to be done. That doesn't go away. I would argue there are more data breaches now than what there were, when does that make it, 15 months ago? And yes, there are, 14 months ago. So I've got to work out what to do next. And it is going to be me running the service and trying to fill those gaps which were there and I'd originally wanted to satisfy by finding an acquirer. I'm going to have to delegate. Now I'm using the word delegate as opposed to any other words such as hiring or building out a team or things like that, because I think there are multiple different ways of doing it, and they may be the right ways. I might need to just hire 1, 2, 3 people. There's a lot of things I do mechanically which I think I can delegate, and when I say mechanically I mean sort of repeatable processes that I can give to someone else. I'm really, really conscious about the trust piece insofar as I need to trust people that work on this. I mean, imagine if part of what I wanted to delegate was data breach verification. Who do I give a data breach to? There are a very small handful of people in this world that have the technical capability and I would trust. Now they may be some of the people that end up joining me. You know some of these people, I don't think that would come as any surprise. So there's that piece. There's the bits around the single point of failure. There are, within this frame, about 100 things in the bushes there that want to kill me, right? Like, I need a redundancy plan. Feeling a bit paranoid now. So I need a redundancy plan. So what happens if I'm no longer able to run this? Now, that is inevitably a discussion which is probably consistent with the discussion about how do I delegate more, because I need other people to take on some workload. So there's that piece. There's a lot that needs to be formalized. So one of the challenges with a pet project is that you started out as a pet project and you as an individual run this thing, and there's only you. You don't have to worry about how do I deal with other people, how do I create processes. I think one of the questions, I didn't put this in the blog post, but I'm sure one of the questions I had was around what are my anti-harassment policies? Well, it's me. I just don't say mean things to myself. It's like, I don't have anti-harassment policies, it's just me. And I laugh because it's a little bit like when someone pops up on Twitter and they go, hey, Have I Been Pwned is awesome, I love what you guys do. It's like, okay, you love what I do. I have never succumbed to the royal we as well. You know how you'll see a Twitter account, particularly the anonymous ones that run some sort of a shady service, and they go, we provide this service, we do this, we do this. And it's like, are you sure it's we? Is it just you? Are you grown up enough to perhaps admit that maybe it's just you sitting at your desk, and there's nothing wrong with that because it was just me sitting at my desk building Have I Been Pwned? So anyway, you can see the point. There's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to change. One of the artifacts out of this whole thing from KPMG is that they're preparing some documentation around here are all the things you need to do to be, deep breath, a proper company. And it is things like having minutes of board meetings, even if it's just me, documenting it about what was discussed inside my own head or determined by inside my own head. But that's one of the things that needs to be there, because this is how companies actually run. I need a lot more formal documentation for all sorts of things. I suspect I'm going to be giving KPMG Legal a lot of money still in the future, more than the eye-watering bill that they've already sent me. So this sort of stuff needs to happen in order to sort of move this forward and formalise it. But I've also got to do this in a way where it's not, to use the term that many people would pick up on, selling out, and it's doing the right thing with the data, but it's growing in a way where it's sustainable. So that pretty much brings me through to the blog post itself, and I want to shift gear a little bit and talk about the feedback that's come back. And I don't think I have ever, maybe once, maybe twice, written a blog post before where I have never seen a single piece of negative feedback. Unless it's come from someone I've muted, and they're probably muted for a very good reason. But every single piece of feedback I've had has just been enormously positive, thoughtful, appreciative, and honestly, that just gives me a huge amount of energy to move forward. You'll see that feedback if you look at the comments on the blog post. You'll see that feedback if you look at replies to the tweet about this. So I've pinned that tweet. It's right at the top of my profile. You won't see all of the emails I've received and all of the DMs I've received and even some of the phone calls I've received. And the messages there have just been amazing. I haven't been able to reply to all of them. I won't be able to reply to all of them. And they're very much, they break down into categories such as, we just wanted to say, yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing. I think it's an awesome outcome, and thank you. Don't need to reply. There's been loads of offers of support from individuals who want to contribute their time, which is fantastic. Organisations that want to contribute money to build this thing out, which is also awesome, because this does take money to run the thing. Multiple organisations that are like, hey, why don't you just send us information memorandum and we'll take a look. I appreciate the sentiment, but there's a certain degree of naivety to that, which is that I don't want to go back through this entire process again, because even if you get the IM, there are months of due diligence and things that go after that. The whole thing might fall apart. I have to re-engage the KPMG guys, not just because I can't do this on my own, but I'm sure that they have some exclusivity for a period of time after this as well. It's probably in one of the gazillion frickin' documents that I signed. And I'm just not at a point to do that now, not when I know that there's a lot of stuff I need to do to make this this whole thing much more self-sustaining. So I appreciate all that sentiment, but not something that's going to happen at the moment. Loads and loads of people just wanting to get involved in one way or another. And I do have thoughts about how to do this, but where I left the blog post is I said, look, I need to have a few months of downtime. Now, I don't know how long it is. Look, it might only be a few weeks before I start coming up with wonderful ideas. Hopefully I'll come up with wonderful ideas. But I need time where I'm not getting stretched so thin that I can't focus on this. So I have cancelled any events that I have for the next 3 months, bar some very small local things that are an hour or two flight away. I had actually cancelled my trip to MVP Summit, so I was going to be going to Seattle in a couple of weeks' time, which I try and do most years, to do the MVP Summit, Regional Directors Summit. That has unfortunately subsequently been cancelled because of coronavirus anyway. And it's the timing's sort of opportune. I don't want to say there's anything good about massive outbreaks of serious viruses, but there are so many events that have been cancelled and so many things that are now running remotely and people not travelling and things being done from home that it's actually a good time to sort of join the masses of not travelling. So I am sure that as a result of all this, and of course we don't know how long it's going to run, the whole coronavirus thing, or how long it's going to actually impact travel for, or how severe it's going to get. But it is a good time not to be travelling, not necessarily because I think I'm going to get sick, but because of all the other things that happen as a result. I got an email from my travel insurance company the other day that said, look, we're just not going to honour any claims if you get stuck somewhere because of coronavirus. You know, let's say that you get stuck in quarantine or there's an outbreak or something like that. Anyway, point is that this is actually a good time to not be going anywhere. So the next event on my calendar at this point in time, I think, is NDC in Oslo in June. And again, I'll do a few little things, mostly around Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane area between now and then, but I'm quite happy not to be going anywhere. So I'm going to use that time to try and figure out how I'm going to take this thing forward. So how am I going to address those challenges that I had back in January? I am definitely going to be reaching out to a number of you who emailed me, particularly to some of the organisations. I've got one thing in particular that I hinted at in the wrap-up of this blog post, which has been a pipe dream of mine for a couple of years now, which I think could have a really, really positive impact on the industry as a whole, and had really great support from every organisation I spoke to about it. And this is something that is a bit of a passion project. It's not a money thing, as best I can tell, there's no money in it, but I think it's a really, really good way of trying to make a positive change in the industry. And then, of course, there are lots of sides to this which could be more commercial in the future. One of the things I keep getting asked for at the moment is people say, hey, can I get annual API keys? Can I get higher rate limits for the API that's publicly available at the moment? And then lots of organisations saying we want to use the data in other ways to do positive things. We want to try and offer better protections to people, give people more visibility, all this sort of thing. So I've got to kind of look at all of that and go, okay, how do I sort of separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak? So how do I find the good stuff that is the right direction to take the service, has public support, keeps it sustainable, and there's going to be that financial bit again, because there's got to be people that actually want to devote time to this, and not just spare time either, particularly the privacy nature of this. I'm going to need people that I can really lean on. So that's where we are. And I came to the beach to do this because that's where I finished off the blog post. I said, look, I've got to have some downtime. I've got to make sure that I'm not just head down the whole time. And that means spending a little bit more time in places like this. And of course, with the travel really cutting down, I'll be able to do that. So that's it. That's where we are. Have I Been Pwned will remain independent, and I'm going to figure out the best possible way to keep it sustainable independent as well. So look, that's about it. If you have any questions that I can answer, either ask them on this video. It might even be better to ask them on that post from Tuesday about the conclusion of Project Svalbard, just because that's now becoming one nice big resource of all the things related to the independent future of Have I Been Pwned. Thank you for listening to this. It looks like I've been going for almost 40 minutes, so I think I should wrap this one up. But I really hope that it's added that sort of personal level to what was already a very personal, heartfelt blog post, and that my sentiments about the whole thing are now pretty clear. Ask those questions. Thanks for watching. Next week, I'm going to do the things that I skipped from this week, which would be the normal business as usual things. And then there'll be a whole bunch of other things that happen between now and then, hopefully including me doing more blog posts, because now I've got more time back to go and do something that I'm really passionate about. Thanks for watching.